Living in prophetic times and preparing for prophetic times. This is SkyWatchTV News for Wednesday, August 26th, 2015. I'm Derek Gilbert. Earlier this week, a former advisor, or rather an advisor for the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Gordon Brown, tweeted recommendations to his Twitter followers that they should begin to prepare, stocking up on canned food, bottled water, and making other preparations. Our guest in studio has a new book that addresses this same recommendation, but from a Christian perspective. He's the best-selling author of The Rabbi Who Found Messiah. His new book is called Be Thou Prepared, and it is our honor to welcome Carl Gallups to the studios.
Thank you, Derek. It's
Carl,
good to be here.
It was really remarkable that somebody who presumably, and I don't know where Damian McBride's heart is, but presumably coming at this from a secular perspective, is recommending that people begin stocking up food and water because there is a coming economic collapse that he sees that's going to be far worse than what we experienced in 2008. You write in your book that we're living in prophetic times.
Yes.
What do you see coming, and how should we as Christians get ready for it?
Yeah. Well, no, you're absolutely right. We don't know where his heart is, but he certainly was speaking. He was aiming his message to a secular audience, and whoever else would listen, but he was aiming it to the world, and he was saying, and to his people, saying, look, we've got some tough times ahead, at least potentially tough times. There's a greater chance than not that there are going to be tough times, and he said, stock up on food and water. Why would he pick food and water? Well, of the 7 essentials of life, those are the 2 most important. I mean, if you don't have food and water within days, you're in a world of hurt. And so, and he's not the only one to be making these kinds of recommendations. I was speaking with you earlier, even the Department of Treasury, the U.S. Department of Treasury, they've issued what are called BOBs, bug-out bags, to their employees, in thinking that perhaps there may be a terrorist attack on financial institutions. And if so, and if you're in one of these situations and you need to get out and you need to put yourself in a survival mode, I mean, this is the U.S. government. Totally with a secular message. Well, of course, my book and our message is that there is a biblical message to all of that, and that is, look, we have an imperative, according to the Word of God as Christians, to be prepared, just to be prepared to do life. Life takes turns and can throw curveballs at us at any given moment. And so we must be prepared, not only, and it's not a wringing of our hands, anxiety, go hide in a hole somewhere preparedness. It's just be prepared to meet the basic necessities of your life so that when the day of evil comes, we can stand and then we can minister to the world around us. And the Bible is filled with these imperatives. You know, people ask me, you ask the question, what do I foresee coming? Well, my goodness, I mean, look at the world around us. Look at the convergence of the prophetic times in which we're living, the rise of Islam, the rise of ISIS along the Euphrates River, terrorism coming to our own shores, the concerns globally of an economic collapse, not just in the U.S. stock market, but globally. And then we have China on the rise, and Russia on the rise, and Russia and Iran, and nuclear arms and deals, and Israel being surrounded by enemies, the possibility of war breaking there, the constant threat of terrorist attacks in our own nation, the racial divisions, the divisiveness in our nation, propped up, some of it by media and even some of it by government itself. And so the possibility of civil disobedience, disturbances that could break out, and our nation's already experiencing that. So it's a shame too, because there are some communities. Ferguson, Missouri has become infamous. And sadly, I lived next door to Ferguson, attended church in Ferguson for for a couple of years back in the early 90s. And I know the area well. It is not as it was portrayed in the media. There were those agitators who came from outside. But your point is, and this is where I see what you're saying, is that there are agitators who have a vested interest in stirring up that kind of thing. Today, Ferguson, tomorrow, Baltimore, where other places around the country. We need to be prepared. Exactly. So what do? You've gone about a normal day, your children in school, you're at work, or you've just arrived home, and civil disturbance erupts in your community. Well, civil disturbance along the lines of a Ferguson scenario, and you say, well, that probably won't happen. Well, listen, it happened once, it can happen again. It's happened more than once in our nation. So something like that breaks out. Well, more than likely, you're not going to have access to the streets. You're not going to have access to just go grocery shopping whenever you want, or just run down to the gas station whenever you want, or to go about your normal routine of life. There may be some days, maybe a week or two, where you'll need to be kind of hunkered close to home, not only providing for your basic needs of life, food, water, clothing, shelter, etc., but also perhaps for people around you, for neighbors that aren't prepared, which is a perfect opportunity to minister the gospel and the gospel of Jesus and the love of God. So so that's one of the messages of my book, Be Thou Prepared. Why to be prepared? Because we're panicking, because we're in anxiety? No. Be prepared because it's the biblical thing to do. It's the common sense thing to do. In fact, one of the Proverbs says, go look at the ant, you sluggard. Even he stores up for the winter, you know. And so we have a biblical imperative to be prepared, just to take care of ourselves, because life is life. But the reason we're doing it is so that we are then free to minister to the world around us. And that's what separates us from the secular preppers, if you will. Yeah. So
those who are trusting in guns and gold rather than in God.
Right.
Although guns and gold are not necessarily bad things either.
Exactly.
You mentioned something earlier, and this was something that kind of surprised me. Well, maybe not really, because I know the government's got a ring, what they call the continuity of government arc, a ring of underground bunkers around Washington, D.C. They don't often talk about it because they're not for us, they're for them.
That's right. But they're some of the biggest preppers in the world.
They really are.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the bug-out bag. And before the program, I told you that over the recent years, I've changed my opinion of preparedness and of those who consider themselves preppers.
Yes.
The bug-out bag is something I always thought that was a go-to for somebody who was really paranoid. Now, obviously, the government, you mentioned, is providing their people with bug-out bags. What is the importance of having a bug-out bag prepared, and why would we need one?
Yeah, I have a chapter or two about that in my book. And listen, I prepare. I've got one in my trunk or behind my seat in my car. My wife has one. My grandson, who's old enough to drive, has one. My son has one. Why? Because just life. You could be out on a lonely stretch of interstate, and you could be traveling across the United States out in the desert and break down or have a catastrophic failure or be in an accident. People have, gone off the side of the road into a ravine. They're there for days before somebody finds them. I mean, it's just life. And it's, that's why we have a spare tire in our trunk. That's why we have a jack and a little toolkit often, because things happen. We don't live paranoid. We don't live in anxiety. But if you will think ahead, have a preparation. And those are the common everyday occurrences. Worst case scenario, what if you're with your family, traveling on the interstate, long trip, you're off to take a vacation, and there's an EMP occurrence from a solar flare or from an enemy nuclear bomb going off over, from the least to the worst, but an EMP occurrence that basically shuts down everything, and here you are, stranded in the middle of nowhere, and you say, well, who's coming? Nobody. For maybe a long time, nobody's coming. Well, guess what? In your trunk is a bug-out bag. What's in there? Protein bars, water purification sources, water supply, maybe a small weapon and some ammunition, because, people get freaky when there's no water and food and they think you have it. Things like that. Maybe some cash money, some identifying documents, a flashlight, a pocket knife, some matches. These things are just the stuff of life. And that's one of the things that I try to minister to people in this book and in my ministry. I was a cop for 10 years. I've been a pastor for 30 years. I deal with the tragedies and traumas of life, from the beginning of my adulthood and marriage to this day. That's been my life for 40 years, dealing in the stuff of life. And I tell people, look, just use common sense. Be prepared. We can't be prepared for everything. We can't think of everything. You don't have to be paranoid, but understand that life can throw you a curveball. And that's not even counting civil disturbances and terrorist attacks, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Carl, where do people find a copy of Be Thou Prepared? Yeah.
Well, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Gallups.com, my last name. That'll take you straight to the publishers, the WND Superstore, WND Books, Washington, D.C. is the publishers. Amazon is usually the go-to place, but you can find it in any good bookstore that carries these kinds of books.
The month of September is Preparedness Month, National Preparedness Month, and Carl will be a guest on a couple of upcoming episodes of SkyWatch TV. He is the author of Be Thou Prepared, and we thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.